The sun had barely risen over the city skyline, casting long shadows across the streets, yet there was an unusual buzz in the air, a mix of anticipation, curiosity, and excitement that seemed almost tangible. For years, people had been quietly holding onto their Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong, some out of hope, some out of faith, and others simply because they didn't know what else to do. Stories of a pending revaluation had circulated endlessly in forums, social media groups, and private investor circles. Most had long stopped paying attention to rumors, thinking it was just another cycle of hope and disappointment. But today felt different. Something had changed, a subtle shift that made even the skeptics glance twice. Major U.S. banks had started officially announcing they were accepting Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong for exchange. The news, though quietly dropped, had spread like wildfire, igniting waves of excitement across communities of currency holders. People from all walks of life were showing up at bank branches early, some in formal suits, clutching carefully counted stacks of dinar and dong, while others, dressed casually, seemed to carry nothing but a sense of cautious optimism. The air outside the banks was thick with energy, a mix of nervous laughter, whispered speculation, and the occasional shout of triumph as someone completed an exchange and stepped out with a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was a surreal scene, seeing everyday people, teachers, retirees, small business owners, and students standing together, united by something as abstract as currency yet so profoundly life-changing. Conversations swirled around expected exchange rates, potential RV gains, and the security of holding these currencies for years. Some spoke in hushed tones about the dreams they had harbored, the financial plans long postponed, and the hope that, after years of waiting, they might finally see a tangible return. Among the crowd was Thomas, a retired schoolteacher who had been quietly holding Iraqi Dinar since the early 2000s. He had no illusions about becoming a millionaire overnight, but he had always believed in the potential, in the stories of eventual recognition of the currency's value. Today, with his passport in hand and bundles of dinar neatly stacked in a worn leather bag, he felt a thrill he hadn't experienced in decades. The line seemed endless, stretching out around the block, yet every step forward brought a rush of anticipation. Around him, people checked their phones constantly, refreshing news feeds, exchanging messages in online groups, and sharing the latest updates on which banks were processing exchanges faster. There was a sense of camaraderie among the strangers in line, a shared understanding that they were part of something much bigger than themselves. Some laughed nervously, others clasped their hands in silent prayer, and a few even shed tears, overwhelmed by the moment. Inside the bank, tellers and managers were equally busy, trying to keep up with the influx of clients, processing forms, verifying identification, and ensuring compliance with banking regulations. Behind the glass counters, the staff remained professional, yet seemed visibly energized by the unusual surge in activity. Calls were coming in from other branches, asking for updates, while senior managers monitored digital dashboards displaying the number of transactions completed. The process was meticulous, with security protocols in place to ensure that every exchange was legitimate and accurate. For many of the clients, the official acknowledgement by a major U.S. bank gave their long-held investments a newfound legitimacy. It was no longer a speculative hope whispered about in private groups. It was a real, tangible opportunity unfolding in front of their eyes. Outside, the sun climbed higher, warming the pavement and intensifying the vibrant chatter of the crowd. Street vendors, sensing the unusual gathering, set up temporary stands selling coffee, pastries, and bottled water, turning the scene into an almost festive atmosphere. People shared stories about how they had acquired their dinar and dong, reminiscing about purchases made years ago when the currencies seemed insignificant to anyone but them. One young woman excitedly recounted how she had convinced her grandparents to invest a modest sum decades ago, and now, standing in line, she felt a wave of validation and hope. Children clung to their parents, observing the unusual gathering with wide-eyed curiosity, perhaps sensing the importance of the day even if they didn't fully understand it. The city felt alive in a way it hadn't before, as if the promise of financial change had awakened a collective energy that pulsed through the streets, through the conversations, and through the smiles and anxious glances of everyone involved. Back inside, Thomas finally reached the counter. He placed his documents and carefully counted bills on the glass surface. The teller, a young woman with a calm demeanor and steady hands, smiled politely as she verified the paperwork. "It's real," Thomas thought to himself, his heart pounding with excitement. "This is finally real." As the transaction processed, he felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. After all these years, the numbers on the screen confirmed what he had hoped for, and the weight of decades of waiting seemed to lift slightly from his shoulders. Around him, others were finishing their exchanges, sharing quick congratulations and stepping out into the sunlight, some laughing, some shaking their heads in amazement, all feeling the subtle thrill of being part of history in the making. By late morning, the news had spread to nearby communities, and the lines outside the banks only grew longer. Reporters began arriving, cameras rolling to capture the scene, while bloggers and social media influencers streamed live updates to thousands of viewers eagerly following every moment. The ripple effect was immediate. People who had been skeptical suddenly reconsidered, reaching out to family and friends to make sure they didn't miss the opportunity. The sense of urgency and hope mingled with cautious optimism, creating an electric atmosphere that seemed to hover over the city like an invisible current. The day moved forward, each transaction confirming that what had once been a distant dream was now a concrete reality. Stories of small wins and larger successes spread quickly through messaging apps and online communities, and for those who had held onto their Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong, the feeling was indescribable. It wasn't just about money, it was about recognition, validation, and the realization that patience, persistence, and a little bit of faith could indeed yield remarkable results. By the time the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the city streets remained abuzz with energy, the lines outside the banks slowly thinning, but the excitement far from fading. People left with more than just exchanged currency. They carried hope renewed, plans invigorated, and the knowledge that, for the first time in a long while, the future seemed full of possibility and promise. By mid-morning, the scene at the New York bank had reached a level of energy that was almost palpable. Inside, the line of clients waiting to exchange Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong stretched down the hallway and into the lobby, with security personnel guiding the flow to maintain order. Phones were constantly buzzing with notifications, news alerts, social media updates, and messages from friends and family, eager to confirm the latest exchange rates or share their own experiences. Every person in line seemed caught between cautious optimism and the thrill of being part of something historic. For those who had held these currencies for decades, this moment was not just a financial opportunity, but a profound emotional milestone, a validation of their patience and faith. Among them stood Henry, a retiree who had acquired a modest stack of Vietnamese Dong years ago during a business trip in Southeast Asia. Unlike many others, Henry had been skeptical about the promised revaluation for a long time. He often dismissed forum chatter and social media speculation as overly optimistic, but today something had drawn him out of his home and into the crowded bank. As he glanced around at the faces of fellow holders, some smiling nervously, others whispering to friends, he felt a strange mix of anxiety and anticipation. The sheer diversity of the crowd was remarkable. Young professionals who had started small investments in the past few years stood shoulder to shoulder with older retirees, some in business suits, some in casual attire, all united by a shared hope and the desire to see their currencies finally acknowledged. Inside the bank, the tellers moved with focused precision, their hands deftly counting stacks of bills and verifying client information against banking records. Henry watched a woman ahead of him complete her transaction, tears of relief glistening in her eyes as she accepted her exchange confirmation. He overheard fragments of conversations, discussions about expected gains, questions about security, and expressions of excitement over finally being part of a legitimate, bank-approved process. For many, the psychological weight of finally seeing their long-held investments recognized outweighed any monetary concerns. It was a moment that had been decades in the making, and for some it felt almost surreal. Henry finally reached the counter. His hands trembled slightly as he handed over the documents and carefully laid out the bills on the glass surface. The teller, a young man with calm and practiced efficiency, greeted him politely and began verifying the information. "It's happening," Henry thought, a rush of emotion surging through him. All those years of uncertainty, of watching forum discussions and waiting for updates from financial news outlets, had led to this very moment. The teller nodded, processing the transaction with methodical care, and Henry could feel the tension in his chest easing slightly. It was real. This was no longer speculation or rumor. It was a concrete, tangible event unfolding right in front of him. As Henry stepped back, he overheard others exchanging stories about their journeys. One man, an entrepreneur in his 50s, recounted how he had persuaded his entire family to invest in Iraqi Dinar back in the early 2000s. He spoke of countless nights spent monitoring exchange rates, reading financial reports, and discussing the potential revaluation with anyone who would listen. Another woman shared a story about how she had held Vietnamese Dong since a childhood trip with her parents, long forgotten in a safety deposit box, only to discover its potential value today. These stories, filled with personal sacrifices, faith, and persistence, created an atmosphere charged with both nostalgia and hope. Outside, the bank lobby had transformed into a hive of activity. People who had completed their transactions were sharing their experiences with those still waiting, offering tips about paperwork, timing, and even which tellers were more efficient. Lines of clients wrapped around the building, but the mood was far from tense. There was laughter, chatter, and a sense of shared purpose. Children clung to their parents, occasionally peeking around corners to catch glimpses of the bustling scene. Street vendors had quickly set up stands near the entrance, offering coffee, bottled water, and pastries to those who had been waiting for hours, contributing to an almost festival-like environment. Every new transaction that was completed seemed to ripple through the crowd, spreading waves of energy and excitement. Henry noticed a small group gathered near the bank's entrance, recording live videos for social media. They were sharing real-time updates, showing the crowds, documenting transactions, and offering commentary about the exchange process. The videos rapidly went viral, garnering thousands of views in minutes. Comments poured in from viewers across the country, some celebrating their own exchanges, others asking questions about how to participate, and many expressing disbelief at the sheer scale of what was happening. The online buzz amplified the significance of the day, making it clear that this was no ordinary banking event. It was a historic financial moment that people from all corners of the globe were paying attention to. Henry finally received his exchange confirmation. The piece of paper in his hands felt heavier than expected, not because of its physical weight, but because of the emotional and symbolic significance it carried. He stepped away from the counter, taking a moment to absorb the reality of what had just occurred. Around him, people were celebrating quietly or openly, some hugging friends or family, others speaking into their phones, sharing the news with loved ones. There was an unmistakable sense of accomplishment in the air, a feeling that decades of patience and careful investment were finally being recognized. As the day progressed, more and more people arrived, each bringing their own story, their own hope, and their own bundles of currency. The atmosphere remained electric, charged with anticipation and excitement. Analysts and financial commentators began posting live updates online, offering guidance, cautioning about fraud, and providing insight into the potential implications of this long-awaited revaluation. Yet despite the warnings, optimism remained high, and the energy of the crowd never waned. People shared advice, celebrated small wins, and connected over shared experiences, forming a community bound by a unique mix of hope, faith, and financial strategy. By late afternoon, the bank's lobby was still crowded, but the mood had evolved into one of reflection and cautious excitement. People discussed next steps, strategies for future investments, and ways to maximize the potential of this unprecedented event. Henry walked toward the exit, holding his confirmation tightly in hand, feeling a mixture of relief, pride, and cautious hope for the future. The streets outside were still alive with chatter, laughter, and speculation, as those who had completed their transactions mingled with those still waiting. It was a day that would be remembered for years to come, not just for the financial implications, but for the shared sense of history, community, and human resilience that had unfolded in real time. As Henry stepped into the sunlight, he felt a sense of gratitude wash over him. The day had proven that patience, persistence, and a little bit of faith could indeed yield results. Across the city and around the world, countless others were experiencing the same mixture of relief and excitement. For the holders of Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong, this was more than an exchange. It was the moment when hope became reality, and the long wait finally came to fruition. As the afternoon sun began to sink toward the horizon, casting long golden beams across the city streets, the energy outside the banks showed no signs of waning. The day had been extraordinary, filled with anticipation, excitement, and a palpable sense of history in the making. By now, news of the U.S. banks officially accepting Iraqi Dinar and Vietnamese Dong had spread far beyond local communities, reaching investors and currency holders across the country and even overseas. Social media feeds were flooded with live updates, videos, and first-hand accounts, creating a global phenomenon that seemed to blur the line between a financial event and a cultural moment. People were glued to their phones, tracking which branches were processing exchanges fastest, sharing screenshots of their confirmations, and offering encouragement to those still waiting in line. For many, it felt like being part of a movement larger than themselves, a shared experience that combined hope, strategy, and the thrill of witnessing history unfold in real time. Inside the bank, the atmosphere had settled into a focused rhythm. Tellers continued processing transactions with meticulous care, their fingers moving swiftly over stacks of bills while they verified documents, scanned IDs, and entered data into the system. Each successful exchange brought a subtle ripple of applause or quiet sighs of relief from those nearby, and every confirmation given to a client seemed to carry more weight than the paper it was printed on. Among the clients was Maria, a young entrepreneur who had accumulated a significant amount of Iraqi dinar over the years through careful research and disciplined investment. She had been skeptical of the numerous RV rumors circulating online, but the official bank announcement had been the tipping point. Now, standing at the counter and completing her first official exchange, Maria felt a mixture of disbelief, relief, and pride. She glanced around at others who had come prepared for this long-awaited moment, sharing a knowing smile with strangers who understood the significance of the day just as deeply as she did. Outside, the scene had transformed into a vibrant tapestry of humanity. People who had completed their transactions were talking animatedly with those still in line, sharing experiences, offering tips on documentation, and exchanging news about the latest exchange rates. Children wandered among the crowd, curious and wide-eyed, while street vendors capitalized on the gathering, selling refreshments and snacks to those who had been waiting for hours. Reporters from local and national news outlets filmed live segments, capturing both the scale of the event and the personal stories of the individuals involved. Social media influencers streamed live updates, creating an online echo of the energy on the streets, and hashtags related to the Dinar and Dong exchange began trending worldwide. For everyone present, it was a moment that felt larger than life, a mix of finance, community, and shared history unfolding simultaneously. As the day wore on, stories began to emerge from clients who had successfully completed their exchanges. A retiree who had quietly held Iraqi dinar for decades described the emotional weight of the moment, tears glistening in his eyes as he recounted years of careful saving and patient waiting. A young professional spoke about how she had convinced her parents to hold onto Vietnamese Dong she had bought years earlier, and now they were finally seeing the tangible results of a long-held belief in the currency's potential. Across the city, similar stories were being shared online, and the collective narrative painted a picture of ordinary people empowered by an extraordinary opportunity. These personal accounts highlighted the significance of the event beyond financial gain. It was validation, hope, and recognition rolled into one, and it resonated with people from all walks of life. Maria stepped outside the bank, the afternoon sun warm on her face, and felt a wave of gratitude and awe. She clutched her exchange confirmation tightly, knowing that it represented more than a transaction. It was the culmination of years of careful planning, research, and patience. Around her, people were celebrating quietly or openly, shaking hands, hugging friends and family, and sharing stories of long-held currency that was finally being acknowledged. The streets were alive with conversation, laughter, and the occasional cheer, a reflection of the shared sense of accomplishment that had spread through the crowd like wildfire. Even strangers felt connected, bound by the common experience of witnessing a historic financial moment in real time. As evening approached, analysts and commentators began posting live updates and commentary online, offering insights into potential implications and sharing warnings about scams or fraudulent schemes that might attempt to take advantage of the excitement. Despite the cautions, the optimism and energy of the day remained strong. People were eager to plan next steps, consider additional exchanges, and strategize about how to maximize the opportunities now officially available to them. The atmosphere was one of both reflection and anticipation, a rare moment when excitement and careful consideration coexisted in perfect balance. Families discussed their plans for reinvesting or saving, investors analyzed market trends, and ordinary holders marveled at the fact that a long-awaited moment had finally arrived. The crowd slowly began to thin as the evening progressed, but the sense of community and shared purpose lingered. Groups of people lingered outside the bank, comparing notes, taking photos, and recording videos to capture the moment for posterity. Streetlights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the scene, while the sounds of conversation and laughter echoed through the streets. Maria walked a few blocks away, reflecting on the magnitude of what she had just witnessed. It wasn't merely about currency or money. It was about patience, perseverance, and the reward of holding onto a vision that others might have dismissed. The day had proven that ordinary people could participate in extraordinary events, and that careful planning combined with faith